In the 15th century, few sounds inspired more fear in central Mexico than the war drums of the Aztec Empire. Across valleys, forests, lakes, and mountain roads, warriors marched beneath banners representing one of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas. Cities paid tribute, rivals feared invasion, and enemies understood a terrifying reality. Defeat did not always mean death. In many cases, death was the easier outcome, because unlike many armies throughout history, Aztec warriors often entered battle with a goal that surprised foreign observers. They did not simply want to kill their enemies. They wanted to capture them alive. For warriors facing the Aztecs, this changed everything. A quick death in combat could be honorable. Being taken prisoner meant entering a future nobody could predict. The Aztec world was deeply connected to religion, sacrifice, cosmic balance, and obligations to the gods. War was not merely political. It was sacred. Victory carried spiritual meaning, and prisoners occupied a special place within that system. When battles ended, surviving captives were often tied, guarded, and marched back toward Aztec-controlled cities. For many, the journey itself became a psychological nightmare. They did not know whether they would become servants, political hostages, trophies of war, or participants in rituals they barely understood. As the roads led toward the great city of Tenochtitlan, fear grew with every step. Travelers described the city as astonishing. Causeways stretched across the lake. Markets overflowed with goods. Temples towered above crowded districts. To outsiders, it looked like one of the greatest urban centers in the world. But for prisoners arriving in chains, beauty brought little comfort. Because rising above the city stood the massive ceremonial temples where many believed their fate would eventually be decided. And among the captives, rumors spread constantly. Some stories were exaggerated, some misunderstood, some horrifyingly accurate. Yet one fact remained clear. The battle was over. Their uncertainty was only beginning. When captives finally entered Tenochtitlan, many expected the same fate prisoners had suffered throughout history. Chains, forced labor, humiliation, beatings, permanent captivity. Instead, what they experienced was often far more confusing, because the Aztecs did not always view war captives the way many other civilizations did. To outside observers, prisoners were defeated enemies. To the Aztecs, many captives possessed something else. Value, sacred value. This distinction changed everything. As prisoners moved through the city, they encountered a world unlike anything most had ever seen. Massive marketplaces stretched across entire districts. Merchants sold food, textiles, precious stones, tools, and exotic goods brought from distant regions. Canoes filled waterways. Priests moved between temples. Nobles traveled beneath colorful clothing and elaborate ornaments. And everywhere, life continued normally. For the people of Tenochtitlan, the arrival of prisoners was not unusual. It was expected. War and religion were deeply connected within the Aztec worldview. Victories strengthened political authority, demonstrated military success, and supplied something considered necessary for maintaining cosmic order. Captives. Many prisoners soon noticed something unsettling. They were not always treated with immediate cruelty. Some were fed. Some were housed. Some were allowed to recover from wounds. Some even received attention from priests. At first glance, this treatment seemed encouraging. For many captives, hope returned. Perhaps they would become servants. Perhaps they would be exchanged. Perhaps survival remained possible. But what they did not yet understand was that preservation and mercy were not always the same thing. Because in the Aztec world, a living captive could serve purposes far more important than a dead one. The longer prisoners remained inside the city, the more they began noticing signs of their uncertain future. Ceremonies, festivals, public processions, temple rituals, music, incense, crowds gathering in anticipation of events they did not fully understand. And gradually, terrifying rumors spread among the captives themselves. Some prisoners had disappeared, not escaped, disappeared, taken away by priests, led toward temple complexes, never seen again. No one knew exactly what happened, or at least, no one wanted to speak about it openly, because even among enemy populations familiar with Aztec warfare, details surrounding sacred rituals often existed somewhere between reality, fear, and rumor. Yet the anxiety continued growing, especially when captives realized something deeply disturbing. The city was watching them, not with hatred, not with anger, with interest, as though they were participants in something already decided long before they arrived. And somewhere high above the city, beyond the marketplaces and crowded streets, the great temples waited, silent, patient, and impossible to ignore. As days turned into weeks inside Tenochtitlan, many prisoners slowly began understanding a terrifying reality. Their survival was not necessarily a sign of mercy. It was a sign of importance. And in the Aztec world, importance could be far more dangerous than punishment. Unlike many armies throughout history, Aztec warriors often measured success not simply by how many enemies they killed, but by how many they captured alive. In fact, for ambitious warriors seeking prestige, promotion, and honor, taking prisoners was often considered more valuable than killing opponents on the battlefield. That created a strange and frightening situation for captives. The strongest prisoners, the bravest prisoners, the most respected prisoners, were often the ones receiving the most attention. At first, this seemed like good news. Powerful warriors believed they might be ransomed, used as political hostages, given privileged treatment. But over time, many discovered the opposite. Their reputation made them valuable for reasons they had never imagined. Throughout the city, major religious ceremonies played a central role in public life. These events involved priests, nobles, military leaders, musicians, dancers, and enormous crowds. To the Aztecs, such ceremonies were not entertainment. They were obligations. The universe itself was believed to depend on maintaining a balance between humanity and the gods. The sun rose because divine forces allowed it. Crops grew because cosmic order remained intact. Society survived because sacred duties were fulfilled. Within that belief system, certain prisoners occupied a unique position, especially captured warriors. Some captives were selected for special ceremonies. They might be dressed in elaborate clothing, treated differently from ordinary prisoners, given food, attention, and ceremonial roles. To outside observers, such treatment might appear respectful. To those who understood what it meant, it was terrifying, because selection often indicated that a captive had become part of a ritual already set into motion. Ancient accounts describe occasions where prisoners were displayed publicly during festivals, introduced into ceremonies, or associated symbolically with specific religious traditions. Not every account agrees on the details. Much of what survives comes from later chroniclers interpreting events through their own perspectives. Yet one thing appears consistently. Captives lived with uncertainty, and uncertainty can be more frightening than certainty itself. Every morning, prisoners woke wondering whether they would be ignored, chosen, moved, questioned, or summoned. Every gathering crowd created anxiety. Every approaching priest inspired fear. Every festival brought new rumors. And among the captives, one lesson spread quickly. The worst thing that could happen was not being noticed. The worst thing was being chosen. By the time many captives fully understood why they had been kept alive, there was little they could do about it. Escape from Tenochtitlan was nearly impossible. The city sat upon islands connected by causeways, surrounded by water, guards, and a population deeply integrated into the empire's political and religious systems. And above everything else stood the temples. The structures had dominated the horizon from the moment prisoners first entered the city. Massive staircases rose toward the sky. Priests moved between ceremonial buildings. Incense drifted through the air. Crowds gathered during festivals and public rituals. For many captives, those temples gradually transformed into symbols of inevitability. Ancient descriptions of Aztec religious practices have fascinated and disturbed historians for centuries. Some accounts were written by Spanish observers after the conquest. Others came from indigenous sources recorded later. Historians continue debating numbers, interpretations, and details. But there is broad agreement on one point. Human sacrifice played an important role within certain Aztec religious traditions. To modern audiences, this can seem impossible to understand. To the Aztecs, however, the universe itself depended on obligations between humanity and the divine. The sun, the seasons, fertility, warfare, and survival all formed part of a sacred relationship requiring constant maintenance. Within that worldview, selected captives could become participants in ceremonies believed to sustain cosmic order. That belief did not make the experience less frightening for the prisoners. Quite the opposite. Because many captives reportedly understood enough about local customs to recognize what selection might mean. The waiting became torture. Every approaching festival created fear. Every gathering crowd increased anxiety. Every summons inspired dread. Some prisoners prayed. Some attempted escape. Some resigned themselves to fate. Others held on to hope until the very end. And perhaps that was the most terrifying aspect of captivity. Not knowing whether today would be ordinary or final. The city continued functioning around them. Merchants traded goods. Children played. Nobles discussed politics. Priests prepared ceremonies. Markets remained crowded. Life continued, while captives waited. And for many prisoners, the psychological burden proved almost as overwhelming as physical captivity itself, because they were not simply trapped inside a foreign city. They were trapped inside a system whose rules they only partially understood. A system where survival depended not only on guards and walls, but on decisions made far above them. Decisions connected to religion, power, tradition, and beliefs stretching back generations. And once a captive's name appeared on the wrong list, everything could change. For generations, the fear of capture became one of the most powerful weapons possessed by the Aztec Empire. Not because every prisoner faced the same fate. Not because every story was accurate, but because uncertainty itself became a form of power. Across central Mexico, rival states understood that defeat in battle could lead to consequences extending far beyond the battlefield. Captivity carried social, political, religious, and psychological dimensions unlike those found in many neighboring conflicts. That reputation mattered a great deal. Because empires do not survive through military strength alone. they survive through perception. And few civilizations understood the value of perception better than the Aztecs. Military victories demonstrated strength. Tribute demonstrated authority. Public ceremonies demonstrated legitimacy. Together, these elements helped sustain an empire ruling millions of people across a vast network of cities, alliances, and subject communities. For enemies facing Aztec armies, fear often began long before combat. Stories traveled. Rumors spread. Returned survivors described the temples of Tenochtitlan, the rituals, the ceremonies, and the uncertainty awaiting prisoners. Whether every story was true mattered less than one simple fact. People believed them, and belief influences behavior. By the time Spanish forces arrived in the early 16th century, the Aztec reputation had already become part of the political landscape of Mesoamerica. Many indigenous groups carried generations of memory regarding warfare, tribute, and captivity under imperial rule. Those memories shaped alliances, decisions, and ultimately history itself. Today, discussions about the Aztecs often focus exclusively on sacrifice and violence. Yet the reality was more complex. The empire produced extraordinary achievements in architecture, engineering, agriculture, trade, urban planning, and governance. Tenochtitlan itself ranked among the greatest cities of its era. But complexity does not erase fear, and fear does not erase achievement. Both existed simultaneously. That is why the story of Aztec prisoners remains so compelling, because it sits at the intersection of power, religion, warfare, and human psychology. For captives, the worst part was rarely the battle itself. The battle ended quickly. What followed could last far longer. Days, weeks, months, waiting, wondering, listening to rumors, watching names disappear, looking toward the temples, and asking the same question every prisoner asked: what happens next? That uncertainty may have been the empire's most terrifying weapon of all.